Our presentation today will focus on the form and structure in the Middle East. The themes that we will be discussing in this, the geography and history of the region, traditional versus contemporary approaches and existing, ethnic and religion backgrounds, colonialism versus independence, globalization, localization, and the approach of combining the global and which we call global imitation versus authentic, is informal individuality versus collectivity. These are some of the themes that we will discuss, that we will be discussing in the within the global, regional, city, urban, and architecture of the region. The big question is identity. Is there an identity? Should there be an identity? And how or whether should we try to achieve? Aya. Yes, what do you want?
Yes, Doctor, do we write notes?
Yes, please. As we said from last time, every lecture from now until the end of the semester, if you take course and send it, it will be
Okay, thank you.
Doctor, can you just review the
considered as
title
a
of
bonus.
lecture?
Yes, the title was and Structure in East and Gulf.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay. Right. We'll start briefly about what is the Middle East. What is the thing that we call the Middle East? The Middle East is a subcontinent or a part of the identified or has borders. It's does not clear defined border. Synonym to what we call the Near East, which is the part of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, and the Far East, which is Japan, China, and so forth. This is a result of the occupation of the United Kingdom of many parts of the world, and to identify as far, near, or middle related to the United Kingdom. So it's a Western metaphor that different parts of the world as related to the center of the empire at that time, the UK. So the Far East is Asia, India, and China, all that part. The Middle East is the part that has, and the Near East, usually part of North African region. So we have middle and near. So as you see, the term itself contains some colonialism roots. So we have a geography, the Middle East or Near East. We have the North African Africa region. We have Sub-Saharan African. We have Europe. We have the Levant, and we have Iraq. We have the Persian Plateau. We have the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa. this is a vision that is not related to colonialism. So whenever the term Middle East is used, it immediately implies some Western or colonialism. The Middle East also is surrounded by other countries that affect its politics, economics, social and cultural, and many other things. We have in the north Turkey and East Europe. We have in the east Iran and India, Pakistan, and China. In the south, we have the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. In the west, we have Libya, we have Sudan, we have other countries in Africa. So we have different countries that surround the Middle East and also impact its dynamics and its politics and its economics and so forth. So the Middle East is unfortunately has many conflicts, and fortunately it has many resources. So if we look at this diagram, we see that we have in the Middle East there is the largest reservoir of oil in the world, and it is all located around the western edge of the Arabian Gulf. But also it has two straits that the oil has to go through, the Horn of the Strait of the Gulf and also the Strait of the Red Sea. So we have the Arabian Gulf that has to go through, and also the Red Sea that it has to go through Al-Mandab Strait and the Suez Canal. And these are, of course, points of control and points of potential conflicts. But there are already many conflicts around that we can see in many parts of the areas surrounding the Middle East. So it is a hot area with too much fuel in it, and it is also a vibrant, very vibrant area with economics and production and real estate and work opportunities and so forth. The geography in the Middle East varies tremendously from one country to another. We have mountains, we have deserts, we have oases, we have seashores, we have even snowy mountains and green plains. We also have very rich history of in the Middle East, in different countries from different backgrounds and so forth. We have also a rich traditional architectural practice, starting from the Bedouin tents to the courtyard houses, to mosques, to vertical houses as in Yemen and so forth. Contemporary architecture is also very fascinating, with new materials, new technologies, new designs are coming in a very short period of time. The 70 years since the mid of the 20th century is not a long time for countries and states to evolve and change. This is almost just 2 generations. So actually some of the elderly of the residents of the Middle East already lived some of the old days before the oil. So there is always a struggle, or there is always a coexistence between the old and the new, the traditional and the modern, the global and the local. So that's why the approach of studying the Middle East requires more depth than just looking at it as an economic opportunity or a traditional place or a struggling place and so forth. So that's why I'm going to briefly present two books written by my friend Dr. Yasser Al-Shishtawi. He was an associate professor at the United Arab Emirates University, and I participated in one of the books with a chapter about Kuwait, and we have been friends for many long years, and he is a very well-known writer in the area with other new books. But briefly, I will introduce these books. The first book is The Evolving Arab City. And in this book, he titled the chapter as The Great Divide, Struggling and Emerging Cities of the Arab World, where he says that the aim of the book is to enrich the study of urbanism and of globalization process as an accompaniment to the earlier book that he published. So he poses very big questions in the beginning of the book. He says, do Arabs still exist? Some look around and say, these are not the same as the Arabs that they used to know. They are doomed with all these conflicts and wars and struggles. They suffered from colonialism for many years that affected their culture and social and intellectual understanding. There are still symbols of Arab identity that are here and there, but what we have now is not the same as the image of the Arabs that used to be. There is negative stereotyping in the world about Arabs looking to, or literature or arts are not part of what the world is doing. They are only recipients, consumers, and proponents of extremist ideologies. I mean, these are negative stereotypes that generated over time. This, of course, is changing with, or in contrast to the historical images of the Arab inventors and chemists and theoreticians, Ibn Khaldun, Wal-Haytham, Wal-Farabi, all those historical people who were the inventors of civilization, not the consumers of civilization. So now we have a different image of the Arab that the world is looking at, that are creating cities, larger economy, also hostile in some way, in some places. So there is a mixed feeling, and people don't really, in the Western world, do not really understand who are exactly the Arabs and how do they think and how they contribute to the world.
Doctor, I have a question.
Yes.
Colonialism, is it that because it was divided a lot by colonies?
No, it was occupied. Colonialism was a stage in history where France and England and Holland and Germany, all the Western world was occupying different parts of the the world in different continents, and they called it colony. مستعمرة. يعني these are colonies. فهي يعني in Arabic it is coming from استعمار. يعني this is مستعمرة and this is a colony. So colonialism was, well, and it was accepted at that time because most of the places that they occupied were not developed like Europe was after the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. And they have the science, they have the power, they had strong fleets of boats, they go around the world. So they managed to go around and occupy different places and use the resources and minerals and products like England with India and the Middle East, France with Algeria, Holland in Africa, UK in South Africa. So they traveled all over the world to as an extreme power. So going back to our cities, the book focuses on several cities, how these issues are related to the cities. Cities like Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut are sites of struggle and contestation. While on the other side, we have cities like Dubai and Doha are trying to be new Arab metropolis, opening up to global capital and world events, World Cup, World Expo, all the tallest building in the world, the first this, the first that, the biggest this, the biggest that. So they have to become part of the global and Western world. So there is a divide in the region between newly emerging cities and traditional centers, as argued by the book. There is what Shistawi calls Gulfication. There is a trend towards imitating what is happening in the Gulf as models to be followed by traditional cities. There is an influence of Dubaization, that what is happening in Dubai, the amount of construction and projects, even in the traditional and old cities. So there is this internal struggle to become modern or to stay traditional, and trying to be part of the 21st century instead of the 11th century. So how can this affect the cities and the planning of our new cities? So as many theoreticians talked about it, some focused on the exclusion, that what in the cities excludes some and creates inclusive areas and places for others. So this was discussed by many. Cities are also conceived as part of a network, and this connectivity cannot be escaped. Communication, transportation, travel, roads, all this is making connectivity very high and impacting other places. Saki Sassen also focuses on the impact of network infrastructure on City4, how the city is affected by this networking, causing fragmentary nature of contemporary Arab urban structure. So it's a famous book called The Global City, and he talks about the marginalized cities. There are some cities that offer a model to which other cities must inspire, if they want to become part of the recognized global world, from off the map or otherwise be marginalized. So all cities are pushed to follow a global model of globalization and get away from this traditional poor and informal, disorganized vision. So there is, as he says, there is a new Middle East. It's not the Middle East of 1001 Nights, and it's not the Middle East of the fancy pictures and paintings that are hanging in the Europe. There is a new Middle East that is emerging, and it's emerging through the cities. So the tool for this is the city. So in the conclusion, he says that there is a great divide in the Arab world between the traditional cities and the emerging cities. And he poses the question, is there still an Arab world, or it is part of globalized? The poor are driven out to visible camps. They are not seen. So if they are not seen, they are not there. So some cities do not recognize everyone. So that's why they call it. It's not. It's designed for the rich and not for everyone. So Dubaization is by that increasing of Dubai all over the world, in Jeddah, in Tunis, in Cairo, in Oman, and everywhere, in Amman, I mean, everywhere there is influence of what's happening in Dubai in the cities. The inequality is a critical part of this discussion. That the great rift in the Arab world, the extent to which this is negative, socio-cultural sustainability, among other things. So this inequality is a focus of the book. There is a new urbanity, a new Middle East, a new Arab coming in different parts of the Arab world. There are civic institutions that are beginning to question authorities and planners' approach to the city design. The second book, briefly, is a collection of chapters about the Middle East, Arab, and Muslim question. Think about this as a vague term, vague terms that are not well defined. What is the Middle East? Who are the Arabs? Who are the Muslims today? Presumption and preconceptions are dominating the understanding of this part of the world. There is geographical designation, suburbs, ethnic, religious, and social groupings. So there is a conflict between what is an Arab and what is a Middle East. Is it the Middle East or the Arab? So he introduces in this book a metaphor of how to read the city as a text, as if it's a book. We read the meanings, symbols, becomes a representation, imagined environment construed from the particular vantage point of each observer. So he emerges the reading of the city as a text. So everything you find in the city, streets, buildings, roundabouts, art, everything has a meaning, and there are many meanings embedded in it. So the trend is exacerbated and amplified through the current urbanization or globalization discourse. Traditional readings, طبعا, of the Middle East, that it's an isolated entity, disconnected from development and civilization. They focus on heritage, tradition, culture. They are not part of the surrounding reality, and they hold the Islamic perspective that they don't really know what they are. So what is the Islamic perspective? They always think about the year 1000, when the Muslim civilization was flourishing and was influencing the European and Western and other civilizations, producing science, producing knowledge, producing literature, the time of the flourish. So people always try to go back to that point. Let's go back to the year 1000. History doesn't go backwards, it only goes forward. So framework through which the Muslim city emerged and developed. Different cities emerged and developed and evolved in different periods of, and it was affected by what happened, and this is illustrated in the. There is always referring to the text, trying to find solutions and answers to the current problems. There were many conferences in the 80s and 90s to support this approach, and the revival of the Arab city glory by tying to its cultural religion. Colonialism also had impact, as studying the Middle East in the relationship colonialism is seen in the colonial narrative. The Middle East was not the only colonialized part of the world. The most famous was the South Africa. Even the United States is considered part of colonialization, where England was occupying it in the beginning. So colonialization is not a factor that allows us to understand what happens in the Middle East. Orientalism, as Edward Said says, claimed that the whole Western European and American scholarship, literature, and cultural representation and stereotype creates and reinforces prejudice against non-Western cultures, putting them in the of or others. A problematic approach to the rest of the world, and we are the only people who know, so everyone else is less than us. So it's a relationship, and how the Occident has used the send in its own terms. So region goes for a narrative perspective. So we cannot understand the Gulf region from one single perspective. We have to understand it from multiple perspectives at the same time. Both grounding settlements, their regional studying the specificity of each, moving away static ideal type of the Islam. There is an imagery of Gersh that examines the Gulf from a socio-political perspective. We cannot understand the cities only from one perspective. Globalization continues to play a big role, and it is a continuous spread through the globe, throughout the globe, of ideas, customs, institutions, attitudes, originated in other parts of the world. Globalization is seen in the Middle East and the Gulf as equivalent to Westernization. It is not the same. Globalization is different than Westernization. Nationalism comes dramatically into play when certain aspects of Westernization are seen as challenges to nations' ethos. There is a conflict, a historical conflict between the Middle East and the West, and it continues to be reinvented every now and then. So when globalization is seen as Westernization, it immediately carries the same historical past. So globalization and modernization are a set of behaviors and beliefs that challenge traditional society. We are changing rapidly, and traditions do not change easily. Even if they change from the outside, the inner core is very change, especially when it comes to religion, far more traditional in its place. The defense of religion all conflict with the acceptance of modernization. So there is always a conflict between the what is currently happening around the world and whether it conflicts with tradition or not. Globalization has benefits. One of the benefits that we are using the internet now. This is part of globalization. The Zoom that we are using is stationed in Silicon Valley in California. So it makes life better. It raises standards, strengthens the society, and stabilizes the existing world. So the society is also selective in choosing what it wants to accept and reject, with those values or institutions most destructive of tradition being loved. So there is globalization is not taken as a whole. There is a selective choice, but is also accepted if and when it is perceived not as destroying the local society, but helping it to survive and flourish in partly a new form. So the book focuses on globalization affect or influence the evolution and development of these different cities. So the rejection of globalization does not mean that globalization fails to infiltrate. It will affect and change the society whether we like it or not. But there is always opposition that comes to how globalization influences the society. So Arab cities have been part of modernization efforts from the 19th century to the present. They were subject to colonialism. They nevertheless were able to grow, develop, and contribute to architecture and urban design. So some urban forms were developed in different cities, and they were also affected or responding to the global issues like the Ebenezer Howard Garden, as in Cairo and Kuwait, the French architecture as it affected Tunisia, Algeria, and this part of the world. So there is an exclusive reading of such cities outdated. We cannot read cities as Islamic cities only. We have to have multiple readings. As any text, no text can be read in one way. We can read and understand it in many different ways. And if we insist on reading a city in the Middle East, the Arab world, the Gulf, as only Islamic city, this is counterproductive. It will not succeed. Heritage and culture are visual issues, but they should not be the sole or dominant factors through which the Middle Eastern city is studied and analyzed. Globalization, cultural hybridity, and polarization. This is how the city was influenced. And it resulted in loss of place, identity, and character, and universalization of the cities. So globalization in itself is not bad. It is how it is used and how it is implemented in different cities. So what is the new trend? The new trend is a nation state is questioned. Still really relevant to look at countries as a whole, or should we look at cities as representative of different entities? So cities centers of the new global economy. Transactions between multinational corporations, financial centers, and cities. So all this is giving cities a new power. Cities are becoming more important than states and becoming in representing the people and the culture and the economy and the production. So they are viewed as products that need to be marketed and attracting headquarters and the regional branches of international companies. So people are now marketing cities, not countries. They have luxury housing, dining establishments, restaurants, entertainment to attract people to visit and come. So there are many urban projects like trade centers, conference centers, hotels, tourism establishments, and so forth. So there is also architecture. We see many cities around the Gulf are inviting big names, Zaha Hadid, Jean Nouvel, Frank Gehry, Tado Ando, SOM, NBBJ, Cambridge 7, they are big names to design architecture, to create attractions, to also support their interest in globalization and modernization. But there is also another city within the city. There is the city of the marginalized, the poor workers, the low-wage employees. This is also a conflict. A special development areas, high concentration of poor labor are considered enclaves housing, and also the enclaves housing of the very rich. So there is this duality that also exists in the city. And sometimes this duality is very close and very sharp, that we can see the luxury houses with amenities side by side with poor shanty towns and informal housing. We also see
Doctor, I have a question.
I'm almost done with this part, and we'll pause and take questions. If you wait a couple of 1 minute. Also here, we see the phenomenon of gated communities, where we have private, luxurious types of housing in protected environments. We also see high-rise condominiums with heavy security. We have walled new types of walled cities that excluded and protected by walls. Keep the in from going out and keep the out coming in. So these are strong similarities up to the political climate present day. Colonialization has been based by globalization. Globalization is free flow of goods and information. Domination, political, social, and cultural. So as he says, it's a paradigm shift, a new architecture and a new urbanism that is influenced by the information technology, communication, and artistic advances in the beginning of the 21st century people. So there is a prevalent view of globalization is that it is a phenomenon extremely imposed upon nations. But globalization is selective. It's something that people choose and they enjoy, and they reflect it in their cities and cult behaviors. They don't take it as a whole. It is by traditions and other interests. And the global city represents the indigenizing of key dynamics and conditionalities of the global economy. So the sacred can coexist, and the perceived conflict between them should only help to enrich urban studies in our region. We should be afraid of group. We can tame it to we want. So I will stop here. We'll go back to our presentation. Where is our presentation? Okay, back there. Time. The first city that we will discuss is Kuwait City. I was living in Kuwait from 1999 until 2010, about 11 years. And I did many research and publications and work. I participated with a chapter in one of Dr. Yasser Shishtawi's books about Kuwait City. Taban Kuwait is a very interesting example of Gulf cities and how they evolved and the influences of economic, political, cultural, everything that we talk about on the evolution of the city. As you all know, Kuwait is a very small country with the borders with Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and it's overlooked the Arab Gulf across from Iran. Actually, Kuwait is what we call a city-state, and this is a good example of how a city is a country as a whole. So this is the area of the city that it is overlooking El Goon, which is a part of the Gulf that is has quiet water, so the boats can go and rest here, and it was a very good breeding for shrimps and sea creatures. Before the pollution that destroyed it. It has some islands, Failaka, Masakin, Oaha, Kubbar, Al-Maradem, Garo, and it has a large island of Bubiyan, which is becoming a focus of development now. The rest of the country is desert, but the whole country is floating over oil fields. All these pink parts are oil fields. This is Burgan, which is the largest oil field reservoir in the country. And even under the city itself, there are oil fields, but they're not utilizing them now because of the urban area. But most of the country is oil. The history of Kuwait started before the 50s. It was a traditional city with depending on fishing and pearl catching. It was surrounded by a wall to protect its residents from outside invasions. It was a protectorate of the British Empire, and it started to gain its independence in the 60s. So it has the same story of traditional courtyard houses overlooking the sea, narrow streets, no cars, poor economy, depending on commerce and fishing and pearl catching and trading. So this was the situation in the 50s. Education was very little, not everyone was educated. The marketplaces were very traditional. Houses were very close. They call it al-Farij. So they are living in as one family in Farij area. Very traditional, very vernacular type of architecture. In the middle of the 20th century, as everyone experienced in the Gulf, the oil was discovered, and it became an attraction for the British and the American, and alhamdulillah that the Germans didn't succeed in getting here, but it was a focal point for everyone to come to occupy the resource of oil in the region. So in the 50s, there was a big change of the city through the development of a first master plan that was immediately implemented without any hesitation. All the old city was demolished. Everything old was destroyed and replaced by new types of architecture and villas and houses. So immediately the city transformed from courtyard house. The villa became the prototype for housing. So instead of having a courtyard in the middle, no, the villa is a building surrounded by an open space. This is a Western view of how people should be living. The old parts of the city were destroyed or demolished, and the new shopping streets were constructed. The introduction of cars, roads, so everything was demolished to be to give place to new types of construction. In the 70s, with the increase of oil prices, there was another stage of development with construction of airports, financial centers, museums, parliament building, and so forth. In the 80s, there was in 12 was a financial crash. Stocks were going down. There was not money, so some of the construction stopped. Some continued, like the Great Mosque, communication tower, and some entertainment areas. The construction continued in the 80s. وبعدين Kuwait experienced the occupation by Iraq in 1990, and it was liberated in 91 by the Allied forces. But this incident left a big scar in the history of the Kuwait and its architecture. After that, of course, the country started to develop through another master plan to increase the urban area and have more opportunities for construction and facilities. So the city grew tremendously with shopping malls, restaurants, offices, museums. This is the famous center in Salmiya, and many shopping centers and car showrooms. Towers started to be constructed, and many projects for more were coming. It was expected at that time more towers will be coming up in the downtown, which already mostly happened. So there was a fear that the whole city will become a tower, imitating the Dubaization and globalization image of other cities. So there are several problems that originated by this rapid development, including dependency on cars, of course, for transportation. Problems related to absence of the human dimension, the design of streets and urban spaces, areas. Problems related to the design of the governmental and private neighborhoods as typical prototype 20th century neighborhoods. Problem with quality of life in the town area after the construction of the malls, the fancy large malls in the suburbs. The downtown became deserted, and it was mainly used by the low-wage employers or laborers and foreigners. So this was a problem of that downtown is dying because it's not utilized. Problem zoning and use of the downtown area. So the hypothesis of my work was that all these problems were related to the first master that was introduced in 1952, that it had embedded all these kinds of threats, the problems that Kuwait is facing now, traffic jams, and so forth. So before the master plan, it was a traditional city with courtyards and narrow streets, until the discovery of the oil and the transportation or the importation of oil to the outside world. So before 1952, it was a vernacular set of narrow streets, traditional houses with mud brick and corals, with safe or places where the boats come and rest. And this is the trading area. Kuwait had 3 walls. It started with a first wall, a second wall, and a third wall, with the growth of the city to protect it from outside invasions. طبعا these invasions were mostly desert tribes trying to come to the city, and some conflicts with other cities. This was common all over the place at that time. So the first master plan called for the demolition of all that old city. Everything here demolished. New roads should be constructed following or replacing the walls, and all these areas should be cleared for business, government, service buildings, and all the people will go out and live in neighborhoods. This master plan is presented by British firm Montagu, Spenceley and McFarlane,